Chapter 28. A Certificate of Proof. Closing the door, Thomas cringed at Warren's groans of agony from behind it. After glancing at his certificate again, he stopped and wished they were louder. Assaulting men's bollocks was becoming something of a habit, and he wondered whether he ought to see someone about it. But because there was no receptionist for him to make an appointment with, or with whom he could leave a short note of apology, Thomas left, keen to get out of the place, find a ladder, and then find Janice. There were two other people in the lift that Thomas entered, and both wore name tags suggesting they probably knew Warren and wouldn't be happy about him being kneed in the bollocks, even if they didn't know his bollocks personally. "Are you all right?" one of them asked. Thomas stopped hitting his head repeatedly against the door and glanced at the man. "What? Are you all right? It's just that you were repeatedly hitting your head against the door." "Was I?" "Yes." Sorry, I didn't realise," said Thomas, rubbing his forehead. "I've just had 3 years of dreadful therapy, you see, so I'm quite disorientated. I can't, for example, recall what pasta looks like." The man blinked in a nervous way and looked up at the floor numbers, calculating their rate of descent before being disappointed with the result. Thomas turned to a woman who'd already done her calculations and was busy considering alternatives. "What's security like in this place?" Thomas asked her. "I beg your pardon?" "What's security like in the hospital? Is it good?" "Good?" "Yes. For example, if a psychiatrist's bollocks get assaulted, how quickly might the place be cordoned off and security called?" She looked at her colleague, who appeared even more alarmed than she. "I'm sorry, but I should have insisted on that bedpan," Thomas said, turning back to the door. "Bedpan?" "Yes, I was going to have a map drawn on it." "A map?" "Yes, look, you don't have a bedpan on you, do you, by any chance? One with a map would be great." The lift went ping, and the two extricated themselves with the sort of fervour traditionally found on wedding nights. The man was already dialing a mobile phone, and the woman was rummaging around in her bag for something similar. "In there?" Thomas said, surprised one would fit. "I don't need one to urinate in or anything, and unless it has a map already on it, I'm not really interested." He looked around. "There was a nurse here earlier somewhere. She had one, very pretty, blonde, shaped like toothpaste. The nurse, not the bedpan. Do you know where I might find her?" The woman brought a phone to her ear and spoke without taking her eyes off him. But having arrived on the ground floor, Thomas realised he didn't need a bedpan after all. On the foyer's far side were some doors that led to the rest of the world, which was bright and sunny and had lots of places to hide in, one of which might contain Janice. The ground floor was busy, and staff moved about it, dealing with cut limbs, ruptured arteries and scalded faces, and the patients didn't fare much better. Indeed, several had been propped in a corner with a distinct lack of hue, and another was being hosed down. There was a reception desk which was busy and covered in blood, across which a man was strewn, who urgently needed both an appointment and suturing, though not necessarily in that order. "I might just leave," Thomas decided. The woman continued to stare, giving details of his location and appearance into the phone. "Yes," Thomas said, suddenly concerned. "Best if I leave, I think. Oh, and if you do see Warren, could you tell him that I'm incredibly sorry? If he didn't realise the degree to which he was shitting me sideways, he ought to go back over his notes. I mean, it bordered on perpendicular." A siren sounded, and because it seemed to be for him, Thomas hurried across the floor toward the doors. They slid sideways as people came and went, and because Thomas was keen to be the latter, his confidence returned briefly, but scarpered again when two security officers barred his way. "Excuse me, sir," one asked, "but I think you ought to come with us." Thomas skidded to a halt and stared at them. "Is this about Warren's bollocks? Because if it is, you can tell him he's got two for a reason." "Come with us, please, sir." They stepped aside to indicate an amenable direction. "You mean he hasn't got two?" "Now, please." "Well, he certainly had one, judging from his reaction." "Sir, come." "Although I suspect it's in a pretty sorry state at the moment, but being in a hospital, I'm presuming you can give him a second one." "Come with us now, please." "I mean, not you personally, of course, as you're security and not doctors. But I suspect that you've removed a few appendages over the years, and adding a bollock, I would imagine, is just the reverse, but with more stitches. This way, please. Look, said Thomas, not believing he was being detained a third time in this place. I cannot believe I'm being detained a third time in this place. I've been very cooperative during my stay, so why don't you lot start cooperating with me for a change? Now, please, sir. Oh, come on! Warren can't berate someone like that and not expect to be needing the bollocks. Did you hear what he said about Dr. Marjorie? This way, please, sir. I can't. I have to meet someone. A woman I've been trying to see ever since the early hours of this morning. This way, now, sir. What part of what I'm saying do you not understand? Thomas cried, aware that several people had paused their bleeding to watch. I'm not coming with you, all right? I've spent more than enough time in this madhouse already, and I do not intend to spend a moment longer. I shall not ask you again, sir. Good. Well, I'm pleased to hear it. Now get out of my way. You will come with us right now, or I shall make you. Oh, for shit's sake! Look, you know what? I've just about had enough for one day. I'm fed up with everyone telling me what to do and not listening. Well, you're going to start listening now, matey. The security guard was broad and foreign, with the sort of accent that drowned puppies. He took a step forward. It was a large, serious step that specialised in extortion. If you do not come with us in the next 10 seconds, he said, removing something large from his belt, I'll make you come with us by force. Do you understand? The entire floor had stopped to stare, and there was no sound other than the wheezing of pneumonia, the muffled crumple of hip joints, and the slow dribble from temporarily staunched arteries. Thomas stared at the thing removed. Oh, is that a baton? It was waved at him in a sort of nodding motif. I see, said Thomas, folding his arms and feeling heat rise in his stitches throb. So you're going to hit me with it, are you? Because the answer was self-explanatory, it became stationary. Right, brilliant. Oh, that's just fantastic. So after everything that I've battled through over this past year, it comes down to being repeatedly clobbered by bats. Come with us, and there'll be no problem, the man said as Puppy's lungs filled. Thomas stared at him, and then those around him. Even the one stacked in the corner seemed to have gotten some colour back through intrigue. You know, I've spent the past year being told what to do, Thomas said, turning back to him, and has ended up with me being hit in the face already today. So you know what? You can take that baton, Mr. Security Person, and shove it up your secure backside so hard that every time you crap, you shatter toilets. You are not doing yourself any favours, sir. Thomas nodded. Oh, don't I know it? Funnily, I'm beginning to realise that's where I went wrong right from the beginning. The baton was waved again, suggesting he move. But Thomas felt a tickling in his knee that made him want to insert it so hard into the man's genitals that he was left wondering if he had latent homosexual curiosities. He hoped so. If this madness ever ended, it doubled his chances of a relationship. You know what? He said. Why don't you just hit me? He pointed at the side of his head with less sutures. Hit me on this side so everything balances out. Presenting his cheek, he screwed his eyes shut and waited. Go on, he cried. Hit me. Do me a freaking favour. I was keen for a brain tumour earlier, but a caved-in skull and subdural hemorrhage would be far more efficient end to all this, I'm sure. The guards peered at him. What the hell is wrong with you? The other said. Oh, nothing, Thomas said, still bracing, other than my shit life having just become shittier since being diagnosed with psychoenteritis. The baton faltered, and there were murmurs from those nearby. A doctor approached and peered at him also. What did you say? Thomas turned to him. Oh, go away. What did you say you had? Do you mind? Thomas said, before indicating the guards. I was about to be hit in the face and you're distracting them. But the doctor ignored him. What did you say you'd been diagnosed with? Psychoenteritis. Rubbish. Oh, but if only it were. But it's not, it's true. I don't believe you. Good. Then bugger off and let these two thugs hit me. You can't just say you have it when you haven't. You'll worry people. I do have it. No, you don't. What's it to you anyway? I'm a doctor. Then go and deal with that guy draped over the desk before he ruins the carpet. Prove it. What? Prove that you've got psychoenteritis. Why? Because you can't have psychoenteritis. Why not? Because it only affects 1 in 7 billion. He licked his lips worriedly. Unless, of course, it really is as contagious as has been suggested. Look, why don't you just sod off and let me get my skull cracked? You're just embarrassing yourself. Thomas almost laughed. Oh, I've been doing that for a long time. He pulled out his certificate. See this? Read that word there and then that signature there. He waved it in front of him. The doctor snatched it and read the scrawls before whispering, Jesus. Not quite, Thomas said, though we do share the same middle name. But isn't that highly contagious? The guard asked, snatching it and doing the same. Apparently, said Thomas. The certificate was dropped, and the doctor threw both hands over his face, teetered backwards, turned and vomited. After a few seconds of communal deliberation, the contents of the hospital's ground floor did the same, exploding in panic and vying to flee Thomas's vicinity. Some threw themselves behind pot plants and others behind desks. The woman and man from the lift careered back towards it, scrambling over those who'd gotten there first, kicking them in the teeth and using the bleeding mess that resulted as footholds. Cupboards were emptied of buckets and brooms and re-stuffed with staff, while the less able-bodied took to brandishing the brooms threateningly and hiding what they could of themselves in the buckets. There were screams, wails of despair and great torrents of sobbing. One member of staff desperately sutured 3 patients together as a sort of human shield, while others burrowed themselves beneath the pallid stack in the corner. The security guards, belting themselves with batons in a vague attempt at immunity, fled from whence they came, and the man bleeding upon the desk was hollowed out and turned into a sort of shelter for 3 receptionists and a small child with a lung full of Lego. Surprised, Thomas stared at them. When the chaos had dissipated into a sea of whimpers, he picked up his certificate and stared at it, before leaving the building and hailing a taxi. When it stopped, he got in and gave the address of Tony at Bonetti's Deli, where he intended to get a sandwich, a ladder, and Janice, in that order.